So I'm happy that you could all tune in tonight. I'm Naturalist Linda, and this program I've been looking forward to doing for a long time. Water is one of my all-time favorite habitats, any kind of wetland habitat, a seep, a spring, a vernal pool, headwater, tributary streams. I have loved water since I was a kid. I was apparently fascinated by it, and actually that was the inspiration for doing what I did in my backyard probably a little more than 20 years ago. So I'm going to get into the PowerPoint now, and let me see, everybody keep your fingers crossed that I can share the screen. And let's see here, share, let me get it right, share sound and video, because we do have some video clips. So let me see if this will work. Here we go. I hope everybody can see that. Let me get it into show mode here. So I think somewhere on your all's computers, you can move me out of the way if I'm blocking any portion of the screen, or just close down my video so that you have full access to the screen there. So anyway, landscaping for wildlife, gardening with water. We're doing a series of these programs, and we were inspired by Doug Tallamy, who's professor at Delaware University. Anyway, he's written books, and he was one of our favorite speakers for the many Zoom webinars that we were able to take advantage of during the COVID period. And we just absolutely love him. And so he's all about making your landscape favorable for wildlife. So this is the first one that's sort of kicking it off, the landscaping for wildlife, gardening with water. So before we begin the next slide, let's just review. I know I am probably preaching to the choir out there, but the essential elements for developing a successful backyard habitat, and this goes for anywhere, living things, animals, birds need food. And especially, and Doug Tallamy was all about providing native plants, because our native wildlife does best with eating food that's native. So anytime that you can plant native things in your yard, do that, because you'll be benefiting the local wildlife. And then, of course, maybe the most important thing, even more than food, and this is especially important in the winter, is water, especially if you can provide water, especially if it's moving water. And so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then, of course, providing them with some kind of shelter. So a brush pile, a hedgerow, a planting of pine trees, nesting boxes, or, little sheltered areas, nesting platforms for, robins will build a nest on a shelf if you sort of put it underneath your eave or somewhere. So tonight, though, we are going to be talking specifically about water, and so how to provide that in the landscape. So here's 3 pictures. These are all my bird baths. So I started out with just the general bird bath on the left there. But then I learned that somewhere along the line that birds and wildlife are attracted to water if it's moving. So I'm thinking, how can I do this? So I got a shepherd's hook. I hung a pail. I got a little valve from the hardware store and drilled a hole in the base of the pail, put the little valve in there, filled the pail with water, and then I could adjust the flow of water so that it would just, drip, 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 just a little plick every now and then. You should have seen how fascinated the birds were with that. They would come down to the bird bath, they would look at it, they'd angle their head one way, turn their head the other way. It was great. So that was one way I provided moving water, but then I wanted to do something a little bit more. And so I bought one of these sort of statuary fountains that actually, this one on the far right here has a recirculating pump in it. And the little valve, I can regulate the flow of that water from, a trickle to a drip. And so, so that's my current bird bath now, which has changed location from where it was in the corner to now sitting on our patio wall. And it's a great spot to have it there because you can sit on the patio. The birds will come and they'll take a splash even when you're sitting right there. So that bird bath with the recirculating pump, that's a big hit with the birds as well. And of course, you don't have to do anything that size. You could even find a little bubbler or something to just bubble the water in, a tray. So some people use the drip tray of the of potted plants and things. I've used that before too. So be creative. It's fun to figure out how you can, provide some of that. So here's a larger example. This is at Stan Hewitt Hall in Akron. I love walking around their gardens there. It's one of my favorite places to go and explore. And so this was a rather large in-ground little fountain bird bath that they had there amidst some of their landscaping. So water gardens, providing water can be as simple as a bird bath or a little hole in the ground, or maybe something larger scale like the formal water garden behind Stan Hewitt Hall. And then the top picture there is the sunken water garden in the sunken garden. So, so these are all things that inspired me. And so in, it was like 1993, this was the back of our house. And so I decided I wanted a pond. And so see where that sundial is sitting there? Well, that was the perfect spot to make the pond because there was already an area turfed out because we had laid some bricks and things down. So that's where I decided to build the water garden. And so one thing that if you're choosing to do a pond and you want it to be useful for wildlife as well as plants, if you're going to plant water lilies in it, you're going to want to find a flat spot that gets a good amount of sunlight, because those water plants are going to want, especially the water lilies, about 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight. So throughout this process, I have to tell you right up front that I did many things the wrong way when I constructed this. But even given the errors, it was amazing how it became, its own little unique ecosystem. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I did that I shouldn't have done and how they got fixed later. And so, so here we go. So there it is. There is the beginning of the hole. So if you're going to do a water garden and you want critters to use it, to live in it, it needs to be 20 to 24 inches deep so that it won't freeze solid in the winter. And so there's the beginning of my hole. The little shelf area there, you need to dig if you're going to have marginal plants in your pond. Those are the plants that grow in shallow water that you might want to plant around the edge of your pond. So you dig a little shelf there, and that needs to be about 9 inches wide and about 8 inches or so deep. And if you have to err on this, be sure that you make the shelf a little deeper than 8 inches. You can always place marginal plants on bricks or rocks to raise them up. But if you don't make your shelf, if it's too shallow, then you're out of luck. So I wish in the beginning I had made mine a little deeper. It was about 8 inches, but again, I wasn't real picky with making sure, you know, how level things were. I mean, I tried, but anyway, this was me not really knowing anything else about how to do a pond. So after you get your shelf, your deeper hole and the shelf set there, you need to clear out an area. I don't know if you can see this. So this is about another 9 inches or so of area around the edge where you're going to put your edging pieces on there. And again, if I had to do this over, I would make this edging area a little bit deeper so that it is a slightly firmer surface to put your edging material on. So again, that was another little mistake. But so then moving on, after you do that, you can put the liner in the hole. Now this liner is a rubber, and I can't remember what the mill spec it was. I bought it from a company. It was there. It's called Tricker Light Liner. William Tricker is the water garden company where I got the liner, and they specialized, and we'll talk about that at the end, specialize in all kinds of water garden stuff. So, and it's guaranteed for 20 years. This liner is guaranteed for 20 years. So you lay the liner in the hole and fill it with water. And yeah, so you're putting a square liner into a round hole. So there's going to be wrinkles. But as the water fills up, it's going to press, the pressure of the water is going to press some of those wrinkles out. So it's not going to look as dreadful as it did in the previous picture. And so, so this is what it looked like when it was just about filled up. And so the next step then was to put the edging in. Now, mind you, I am a naturalist, not a bricklayer. And so what happened was I decided to line it with bricks. And I put the mortar down right on top of the liner and put the bricks in it and called it good. And you can see there from that picture that it was not great. I mean, it's not real level. It's the bricks weren't even set in there very well. And this is not the way you're supposed to put edging on your pond. And in the next few pictures coming up, you'll see the proper way that it should have been done. But anyway, after a couple of winters of freezing and thawing, so the bricks were loose, and I'm like, I'm taking them out. I'm going to do something different. And so my brother is a pretty handy guy. And there was this little formula that appeared, a little drawing, like a draftsman's drawing of a curved piece. And he said, you know, it's something like this. If I made this, would this work? And I'm like, yes. So the next thing that happened was that based on that little drawing that had this little arc, this little curved piece, he made a mold out of plexiglass and screwed it down to a piece of plywood. It's about 2 inches thick. The plexiglass was 2 inches thick, and he created it so that when you poured concrete into it, the sides and the bottom, which on my pond is the actual top part of the edging piece, would be smooth. And so he figured out, you know, the pond is 6 feet in diameter. I have to make it this size. I have to leave so much for gaps in the edging pieces. And so he made these 6 or so edging stones out of concrete, and they have been in place since then. They were absolutely wonderful and so much better with the brick than the brick. I took all the mortar out, all that stuff. And so I set these right on top of the liner as well, which that still isn't quite right, but it was better than the bricks. At least I didn't have to worry about freezing and thawing and mortar getting cracked and bricks coming loose, because these pieces are heavy. And so, so I've been absolutely thrilled with those edging pieces ever since then. So, but again, I really wanted to do this right. And in about 2014, because of previous mistakes that I had made, the liner was starting to leak. And I decided, let's get a new liner, let's replace it, let's kind of fix this so that it's done the correct way. So there's the picture of the drained pond with the old liner still in. And the picture on the right is the plan for the new liner and some new, a new substrate on which to set those nice curved concrete edging pieces that my brother made. So what we did was dug out and made the shelf twice as wide as it had been. So from here to here, we just dug flat. And then we got these blocks. They're the same blocks that we used on our patio wall. And so these blocks were going to serve as the foundation for those curved concrete pieces that my brother made. So we did a little bit better job of making things level too as well. So that was good. So the new liner, put the new liner in the hole and started filling it with water. And so here's the first row of blocks that are going down. And then we've got the second row of blocks going down. Now this is the way that you're supposed to put the liner in. So after you get your substrate in here, then you fold the liner over these blocks and cut it off. And this is, I haven't quite cut it off even with the edge of these blocks. But the whole point is to pinch the liner between these blocks and the edging pieces that are going to sit on top of this. I hope that makes sense. And so here's what it looks like all finished. So, and the next slide will show you, I'll see if I can zoom in here. Let me find the little zoom thing. So if you look right here, right? So you can see my 2 rows of blocks, and you can just see the cut off liner pinched between the blocks and the edging pieces. So now my my pond, the lip of the pond is raised up above the level of the soil by about 2 inches or so. So that's what should have been done in the beginning, but because I was impatient and I wanted a pond and I wanted it now, I just, took shortcuts that I thought would work, which they pretty much did for 20 years. I mean, that liner did last 20 years or so. So I can't complain, but it was all due to my mistakes that, I needed to replace it. So anyway, so there it is. After you get all of that, work done with the blocks and the edging, then you can think about planting your water garden. But before you do that, there's a little formula that you need to know about, and it's an important one. Sunlight plus water plus soil/nutrients equals, and if you're thinking algae, you would be correct. you will get, in the days after you plant your water garden, you will get pea soup water. And what happens is that it's a buildup of single-celled algae, which results from the overabundance of nutrients in the water. But you don't have to worry about it because there are some critters that will take care of that problem for you naturally in a few days. And they're these critters. So these are invertebrates, most of which are crustaceans. So things like, this is Daphnia. Some people know it as a water flea. And then we have below it a little critter called a rotifer. Rotifer right here. In the center here is a little crustacean called a seed shrimp. And right here is another little crustacean. This is called Cyclops because see, it has one eye spot right there, like the giant Cyclops. And then this is the actual larval form of this adult right here. And so, and the rotifer actually is an animal. It belongs to the, it's in the animal kingdom. So it's not, you know, a crustacean. And, but they're important because they're filter feeders. They have these little cilia on the edge of these discs that rotate, and they draw water into the mouth. And there's a little organ in here that grinds the food. So they're going to be all of these things feeding on those single-celled algae. And my pond cleared up within two days or so. It was amazing. I did nothing to it. They did all of the work. So the other thing is to keep in mind is that with algae, if your water garden, like mine in the beginning, was sitting in full sun for almost the entire day, some of the filamentous algae can become a problem. And the way to solve that is to plant have at least half of your surface, or 50 to 60% of the surface, covered with water lilies or some type of floating plant. I have some duckweed in here, floating plants to shade the water, and that helps keep the algae down. I'm not a person who's going to use chemicals, any kind of chemical, in my pond. So I'm going to find the natural ways to do it. And shading the surface of the water by about half worked like a charm. Another non-chemical option is to use barley straw. Apparently, when barley straw breaks down in the water, it releases algae inhibiting chemicals. And so that's another natural way to take care of filamentous algae in a pond. And then the other thing that you see here in my pond are these rocks here that I set on the shelf at various levels. If you're gardening for wildlife, you want to have your pond accessible to birds or frogs or turtles or whatever's going to come. So I have several levels here where if a bird wants to come down and take a drink, it could come on this rock. If it wants to take a splash in the pond, there's a couple of different levels of water depth here to pick from. Generally, you know, bird baths have sloped edges so that smaller birds can choose shallower water and larger birds can go for the deeper water. Generally, they don't like more than 2 inches of water in a bird bath. And so if you have a bird bath that isn't sloped, it would help, you know, to have a rock or something in there where smaller birds can feel safer when they're having a splash. So in my pond, I have a couple areas where I've got some rocks in the margins so that, you know, frogs want to sit on them or birds, you know, so it helps it be a little bit more wildlife friendly. As your pond ages, you're going to get predators in there, and predators, aquatic predators, are to be encouraged. So in case any of you are wondering, have I ever had problems with mosquito larvae in my little pond? The answer is no, because I have these critters in there and they found it all by themselves. Don't ask me how, but I have, there's been back swimmers in there, water striders. It's so funny. My brother and I, and even my brother's buddies, they would sit in the backyard and swat at deer flies and then throw them in the pond and watch the water striders pounce on the dead, well, sort of partially dead flies. But these, I mean, it was hilarious. So we would feed the water striders, go figure. Yeah, we're nerds. So anyway, so water striders, they take care of stuff on the surface. Here's some back swimmers. They are underwater predators that belong to the true bug family. This right here, I took this picture in my lily pond. This is predaceous diving beetle larva. And he's got a couple big chompers there. And so it's going to be cleaning up any kind of little mosquito larva or anything else for that matter, that it could grab with that to feed on. And then I did import some dragonfly nymphs. We have a 3-acre lake farther back on our property. And so I scraped out some seaweed and stuff and I plucked through it and I got several dragonfly nymphs. And so I put them in my pond as well. And now, and you'll see later, I have a little video and I get dragonflies coming to my pond as well. So, so those are some things that make up my little pond ecosystem. It was really, really cool to watch it happen. And we've been enjoying the pond in the backyard for, over 20 years now. So, so let's talk about planting the water garden. And so here's an example of some perforated baskets. These are used for planting aquatic plants. The size is based on the type of plant that you want to plant. So if it's a water lily, you're going to want this. This is about a 12-inch by 12-inch basket, and about maybe it's 12 inches tall too. So it's their largest basket that they have there at the water garden place. And then there's an intermediate and a small version for marginal plants, or if you're going to plant some submerged plants, you can use the small container. But the perforations in the sides of this are going to allow the roots of the water lily or marginal plants to grow through the side of the basket, and then they can absorb additional nutrients from the water that way. So here's an underwater picture that I took in my pond of some water lilies, and you can see right here the roots that are growing through the side of the basket. And so in my pond, I have the water lilies set up on bricks. And we're going to talk about the different types of water lilies, but in general, all water lilies don't like more than about 6 inches of water above the surface of their roots. So I have my planting baskets sitting on, I made like a little shelf of bricks, and I set the basket on that so that I can adjust the level of water above the root system of the water lily. So there's a couple different kinds of water lilies. There's the hardy variety, which are ones that if you choose to, you can overwinter them in your pond if you lower them to the bottom. And that way they won't freeze, although I've had hardy water lilies in my pond that I didn't lower to the bottom and they didn't freeze. But my pond never freezes more than about 4 inches of ice. So, so there's space between the top of the water lily basket and the level of the ice. And so I've never had an issue, but to be safe, probably the best thing is to lower them to the bottom. So hardy water lilies come in a variety of colors. red, pink, yellow, and white are the basic 4 colors that they come in. They hold their blossoms either just slightly above the level of the surface of the water, or sometimes they'll float right on the surface. Which differs from the tropical water lilies, which are ones that, of course, cannot overwinter in our area unless you bring them inside. Some people bring them inside and overwinter them in a water-filled tub in the basement or something. So that's a possibility. I don't do that. I do buy tropical water lilies because I can choose to get different kinds each year if I want to. The hardy water lilies are more permanent, and let me tell you, they are very hard to repot because you will have to repot them. And that is not an easy task. So I have one small, very small pygmy water lily that's a hardy water lily. And even that one's a pain to repot. And I have to do that every couple years. But the big ones are even worse. So anyway, the point is I have my little hardy pygmy water lily, and then I get usually 2 tropical ones that are different each year, except that I've been stuck on the one on the right. It's called Pink Sapphire. And I adore the color of pink. And then it has these nice mottled leaves that are sort of maroon and green. And then the one on the left here is a night blooming water lily that is called Red Flare. And let me tell you, it is spectacular. That blossom is probably 6 inches across. It's amazing. And they have a different blooming habit. Night blooming lilies open in the late afternoon, and they stay open all night. And they close up around late morning or around noon of the following day. So there can be some overlap when your night blooming lily hasn't closed yet and your day blooming lily is just starting to open. So anyway, tropical water lilies, the other thing about them is that there's a wider variety of colors: light blue, purple, red, yellow, white. There's even one that's called Aurora. It changes color almost each day that it blooms. There's one that's sort of greenish. So you've got a wider variety of colors with the tropical ones. They hold their blossoms well above the surface of the water. So we're talking, they're going to be on stalks that are, they'll hold them 6 or 8 inches above the surface of the water. Also, the tropical water lilies are very fragrant, and they really smell good. They attract a lot of our native pollinators. I've had little sweat bees. They go diving right into the center, especially of Red Flare. The year that I had it, I'm like, I saw these little sweat bees going in and out of there. I'm like, look at that. So the bees and some of the native pollinators will enjoy having the water lilies in the pond as well. So there's all kinds of options for, choosing interesting colors and textures and day blooming versus night blooming. So it's fun to, every spring I enjoy. Ooh, what am I going to get this year? All right, so let's talk about some marginal plants. And they come also in a number of varieties. I try and stick with native plants. So arrowhead on the right and some of our native flag lilies over here on the left are good choices. I have a container of cardinal flower growing in the margin of my pond. Duckweed is a floating plant, but it usually hangs out around the margins because it gets stuck around the baskets and the roots of the marginal plants there. But some water garden places, and the place where I go also sells some non-native plants that they're probably okay, but I like to stick with native stuff. So also you have a possibility of planting some submerged vegetation. They're called oxygenating plants, which help add oxygen to the water. I have done that in the past, but they've done so well that they grow and they just take up all the space in the water. I like to have water that you can look down into. I like to have water that's clear, that I can look into my pond and see to the bottom. And with some of those submerged plants, they will take over. Not that that's a bad thing, but I just like to have some, when I look into my pond, to see the depth of it. So anyway, but marginal plants, add interest and variety, and sort of spice up the edge of your water garden. So submersible pumps. Oxygenating plants are one way to put oxygen to the water, or you can use a recirculating pump, which you can attach to a piece of statuary or a fountain, or just have it bubble up through the water. Circulation is a good thing, but keep in mind that water lilies don't like a lot of turbulence. So if you're thinking about having a waterfall or something attached to your lily pond, be sure that the lilies are set sort of away from where all of the turbulence is. I have a little statue that squirts water into the pond, and it splashes on the water lily leaves a little bit, but it's not enough to, I've never had an issue with, the lilies not doing well because of that. So anyway, so these are a couple of the pumps that I've used in my pond. The first one that I got was an oil-filled pump. I would recommend staying away from those. They're supposed to be sealed, but I had one that was putting an oil slick on top of my pond. And it's not that it's toxic. I mean, they use a safe oil, but I don't want to see an oil slick on my pond. So since then, I have switched over, and I've found companies that make magnetic drive pumps. So it's all mechanical. There's no oil in it. And those have operated nicely for me for a number of years. And it's what I've got in my pond now, and it's pumping water as we speak. So, so that's something else to keep in mind. And then when you install the pump, be sure that you set it on a brick, raise it up off the bottom a couple of inches, because you don't want it to be sucking in gook and stuff. I mean, it's going to do that anyway. And you will have to, maintain your pump and clean it a few times over the summer. I always know when I need to do that, because my little spitting frog there doesn't spit quite as far when the pump is starting to get, pull in some of the underwater, frogs and stuff swim around in there. And so it is going to pull in some of the bottom gook. So anyway, so there is some maintenance that you will need to do that, but it's easy to pull out. I usually just take the hose and hose it down. I hose out the tubing and put it back in, and it's good to go. So some seasonal issues and care with a water garden. And I think in the fall, you can all guess what the problem is. Yes, all of the leaves find their way right into my pond. And there's a couple ways that you can solve that. I did one year get some of that netting, sort of like the window netting that we have over the windows at the Westwoods. I used that and made a frame and put it over that. The problem is that critters, I mean, there's things that are living in this pond and I want them to be able to get in and out. And I didn't like the netting because I wasn't sure they could get in or out. So now I just put up with all of the leaves getting in the pond, and usually between the end of summer and the beginning of winter, I am hauling leaves out of my pond. We have 3 huge white oak trees in the backyard. And you know, those leaves, the oak leaves don't break down very quickly. And so they all find their way into my pond and then they sink to the bottom. And then because there's tannin in the leaves, it turns the water brown. And so I am out there with nets and rakes and I clean out as many of those leaves as I can. It's usually a losing battle. Right now, if you were to look in the pond, you would see a whole load of leaves in there. So I will be cleaning that out as the weather warms up here to get it ready for spring. I never take out a lot of the muck that's on the bottom. I keep maybe half of the bottom clear of muck, especially the area around the pump so that it's not sucking stuff in all the time. But I do leave muck in there because there's organisms that live in there that are needed to keep the water healthy. Things that overwinter, the frogs need that. They hunker down in that muck. And so I never completely clean out the muck ever. So that's how I deal with the leaf issue and the muck issue. So then in winter, what do you do in the winter if you want your pond to be something that's useful for birds and animals, especially in a time of year when most of the water is under ice or frozen? And so this picture is the October snow of 2013 when we had a freak snowstorm and there were still lots of leaves and stuff on the trees. Those are I've got 3 serviceberry trees that in the backyard that sort of surround the pond, and the weight of the snow and the leaves bent them almost right into my pond. And so you can still see the lily leaves there. It wasn't cold enough to freeze the water, but that was quite a fiasco. So anyway, in the winter, I detach my statue from the pump and I let it discharge at the surface of the water. And there's 2 reasons that you want to do it. Number 1 is that if you've got frogs and fish or something that are living in there, they need to have oxygen. There needs to be a hole open so that noxious gases that build up in the water can escape. So having a hole open in the ice helps that. And then of course, having the recirculating pump running also helps that. But because the water at the bottom of the pond is warmer, and because it's constantly moving, it will actually keep a hole open in the ice all winter. And yeah, sometimes in really, really cold, windy weather, it will freeze over. But as you know, like with spring-fed ponds and areas where there's a spring, that ice isn't very strong over those places. And so, so when I see that we've had, a really cold spell and it looks like that hole is frozen, I just go over and tap it and it just sinks right down and the hole opens up. And so here's just a few examples of things that are taking advantage of it. I took these pictures from our kitchen window. The pond is practically right outside the back door. And so we got the bluebird there, there's a house finch, the blue jays. I've seen squirrels come and drink from those holes. And so wildlife, especially the birds, really, really appreciate it in the winter. Another option that I did use in my pond one time, but I wouldn't recommend it because I set it on the rocks that I had on my in the margin of my pond, and it kept a hole open, but the ice froze, and the it was exposed. The water, the water froze around it, and then the water bird bath heater was just sitting on top of the rock, and I'm like, no, that's not going to work. So but if you have a bird bath, you certainly could use that. Or you could just plain old buy a heated bird bath. That's a good way to solve the problem. And of course, the birds will thank you for that. So I think most of you have heard that saying from some famous movie: if you build it, they will come. So these next pictures are some critters that have called my pond home, or at least passed through on their way. So here's a few of them. So so this critter right here is a bullfrog, and we called her Bug Eye because if you look right here at her eye, sort of the iris part of the eye was a little bit deformed, and we noticed that when she would try and eat something, oftentimes she would miss because I think maybe her depth perception was off. So we helped her along and fed her worms and slugs. And this is an interesting critter because most people think, frogs, they sit there like bumps on the logs, and there's probably not much intelligence up there, but not with this critter. It was hilarious. She learned that people were associated with food. So if I was working in my pond doing maintenance, all of a sudden the bullfrog is right in my face, like right underneath my nose. Yeah, it will swim over, and it's waiting for food. Another time, my brother and his buddies were watching TV in our garage, and they noticed that all of a sudden the bullfrog was sitting inside the back door of the garage. So not only did she have to know that the humans were in the garage, she had to know how to get there, and she found her way over there, which it's a frog, who would expect that from a frog? But it was fascinating, and she was free to come or go, And so one summer she disappeared, and I'm thinking, oh, good, she went back to the lake. She'll be happy. She's doing frog stuff. Well, that fall, she reappeared at the pond, and I'm like, really? And we knew it was her because of the bug eye. I mean, that was a distinct characteristic of her. And so she spent the winter in my little lily pond. And then, so she did that same thing for the next couple of years. And then finally she disappeared. So I'm hoping that all was well. But anyway, so that was the adventure with Bug Eye, the bullfrog. And then we had this little toad who in the springtime would sit on the rock and sing and sing and sing and sing. But I don't think he ever attracted anybody. I felt so bad for him. He was so cute. And then, of course, we got the insects, the damselfly here and the dragonflies. Green frogs find our pond. I don't know how they I don't know if they hear the water. I don't know if they smell it, or how are they just passing through the backyard? How do they find my pond? I have no clue, but they're in there and they overwinter. The first year I put the pond in, I had 12 of these critters in the pond. It was so loud I could hardly stand it. It hurt my ears. This is a gray tree frog. And this little guy was singing in a limb of a tree that sort of overhung the edge of my pond. And as I was listening to him sing, later I heard a splash. So I'm assuming he jumped into the pond. And then in the morning, the next morning, I found these attached, little gray tree frog egg packets attached to various water lily stems and the sides of my pond. And then, of course, later in the summer, they turned into little tadpoles here. And you can always tell a gray tree frog tadpole because they have that sort of fat tail, which other tadpoles don't have. And then here's a couple of gray tree frogs, which don't have to be gray. Sometimes they're green, depending on their mood or age, I don't know, or how they feel. But these two were climbing up the side of our house on our patio, not too far from the pond. So we get to enjoy tree frog song every once in a while. And then last spring, these two showed up. Now, mind you, we have a 3-acre lake farther back on our property. And where are the mallard ducks? In my little dinky lily pond. And I'm thinking, I hope you don't stay here because you're going to mess up my water. Anybody who's ever had ducks as a pet and has had a water trough know how filthy the water can get from, you know, poop and stuff like that. So luckily they moved on. And then several years ago, there were these two that showed up. And I said, did I mention we have a 3-acre lake on the back of our pond? And where are the baby green herons? In the backyard on the edge of my lily pond. So, you know, I took this picture through the kitchen window. And so this is what they were doing, or at least one of them. So see, he's standing on, or she is standing on the rock that I have on the margin. But so it's going to try and take a bit. Oh, yep, I fall in. What a goofy looking critter. Yep, so it had a quick splash. And then it was pecking at things. Oh, look, it got a snail. See a little snail? Yeah, shake all the water off. Yep, oh, the snail, look at, there it is. But now I'm going to shake off again. And I think I dropped the snail, or maybe it ate it. I can't really tell, but here we go. Let's shake off and then almost throw yourself back into the pond. So, you know, baby birds aren't too smart. They're very clumsy. And so these two green herons, I couldn't believe it. You know, they nested somewhere on our property. I don't know where, but they had been hanging around. And so they showed up in the backyard in my lily pond. I couldn't believe it. It's like, oh my God. And so this was last November, and there'll be a closer up here of this critter. So there she is. This is a female shadow darner. You know, dragons and damsels, they're my thing. And so I was thrilled to have this female darner. She is laying eggs in the moss, the damp moss that is growing on the inside edge of my pond edging. And so when I clean out the pond this spring, I will have to watch for her babies in there. And so whenever you know, cleaning out the pond is usually a slow process because I go handful by handful through the pile of leaves and muck that I pull out and put any, you know, living critter in it back into the water that I see. So those are just a few of the things that have shown up in the backyard. Why? Because I put in the pond. So as we're coming to the end here of our program, if I had to do this all over again, I would do this. I would get one of those, just set it somewhere on a flat spot and have a raised pool, or maybe a partially raised pool would be much easier than the digging and the slogging that I did putting in my little lily pond. Not that it wasn't worth it, but now as I'm getting older, you know, hauling lily ponds in and out of the pool, they're pretty heavy when they're soaking wet. So I do it a simpler way next time around. And it's amazing the variety of some of these preformed pools that you can get. You can get them with little islands. You can get them with little waterfall features that you can attach to them. There's different shapes, different sizes. So, you know, so that's what I do the next time around. But I'm not planning on doing anything soon. So anyway, so here is my go-to spot for all things water garden related. William Tricker is in Independence, Ohio, off of Brecksville Road. Yeah. And so it's listed as, there's a historic, the historic building plaque on the side of their building. And so with the COVID last 2 years, they were not taking any walk-in customers. So I had to order my stuff online. But it's fun to go there if you ever have a chance. If restrictions are lifted, I would call and find out first. But I've been there in February. Sometimes I just go there because it's nice to walk into a 90-degree greenhouse in the middle of winter and see and smell beautiful tropical water lilies and dragonfly and damselflies flying around inside the greenhouses. It's really a very unique place. So anything you ever wanted to know about water gardening, you can find out at William Tricker. They've got great resources on how to do these, how to build a pond. They've got all the supplies. They've got pumps. They've got the plant, everything. So check out the website, and if you're interested, you can learn a lot about water gardening from going there. So anyway, we've come to the end of our program. I hope you've been inspired to add a water feature, some sort of water feature in your yard to provide for wildlife.